The event is organized under the project Competency through Cooperation, Advancing Knowledge on Georgia's Strategic Path, Geopath. We're happy to have very interesting speakers for today's event. I will just very briefly give a few logistical comments and then give a word to the Dean of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences from the Tbilisi State University, Ms. Tamer Dolbaya. So most important thing that I need to tell maybe is that the event is being recorded and we will be sharing this video through our means of communication, and the working language of the event will be English today. And there is no translation provided today for that reason. So now I just don't want to take too much of the time from the event itself. I would like Ms. Tamer Dolbaya to give her welcoming remarks, and after her, the director of the Georgian Institute of Politics, Dr. Kornelika Kachia, will take the floor. Thank you and wish you a good event.
Thank you. Hello, dear organizers of the event and invited guests. Welcome to the round table. The topic of today's discussion is very crucial for Georgian state, society, and academic cycles. In 2004, Georgia, for the first time in its history, created a government agency, the State Ministry for Euro-Atlantic Integration of Georgia, and since then Georgia made big progress in the integration process with the European Union. For Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic integration, it's very important to have political coordination and share the experience with the countries that's similar to Georgia in the process of Euro integration. And the fact that today's round table we discuss not only the case of Georgia, but cases of Ukraine and Moldova in the sciences and the representative of the academic cycle, I emphasize the path towards the integration with the EU in the field of education and science. The advancement of the higher education system of Georgia should be in accordance with the modernization agenda for higher education of EU. Being the part of Bologna process, Tbilisi State University and our faculty successfully implements the institutional partnership with the European higher educational institutions, shares the knowledge and experience for improving the curricula and the management of the educational process. We are actively practicing student and academic exchange programs and joint research projects to enhance the possibilities of Georgian students to have access to the European education. These processes promote the integration of Georgia into the EU's educational and scientific space. I would like to use the opportunity and express my gratitude toward Norwegian Institute of International Affairs for co-organizing this event, for training organized for our faculty PhD students, and for giving the scholarship to one of our PhD students. I hope that our relationship will intensify. From our side, the Tbilisi State University, the administration of the faculty will use its ability to support the growth of awareness about the Europeanization process in the academic space. I wish all the participants successful discussion, and I hope that today's roundtable will be fruitful.
Good morning. Let me also join Dr. Dolbaya, welcoming you on behalf of Georgian Institute of Politics for this interesting event. As you know, this project is a 4-year project and actually includes 3 institutions. It's Georgian Institute of Politics, NUPI, and Tbilisi State University. So when we started this project, we actually wanted to somehow to work to include the university, and since most of this project actually related to the enhancement of the research, and especially in academia, we've also the involvement of universities, Georgian universities, is very important. And one of the biggest achievements of this project, as you know, it's not finished yet, but will be probably that we will be very closely working with Georgian PhD student. And one of the activities which was already done a few days ago was that during this project, there was a seminar held how to publish internationally. As you know, this is one of the most interesting, probably the project for Georgian PhD student, and there's some other actual activities which is planned. Actually, it should be held actually in Tbilisi, but because of pandemic, unfortunately, we were not able to do this. Also, more importantly, is that during this project, we also funded one PhD student who will be writing about the same topic in Tbilisi State University. And also next year we will have some other activities and also academic papers, which is very important to promote the the quality research in Georgia. So this is just very briefly about the project. I would like to stop here and to give the floor to the moderators of today's discussion. Dr. Helge Baksrud. He's a senior fellow of Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. Helge, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Dolbaya, and thank you, Cornelia, for the introductory words. Yes, I'm the principal investigator of the Geopath project, which is, as you have heard, a joint Norwegian-Georgian undertaking where we combine academic research and competence building through mentoring and through masterclasses. And as Cornelia just mentioned, we had our first seminar or masterclass on academic publishing for Georgian PhD students only last week. And in the course of the project, we're going to have several such masterclasses. So if there are any prospective participants out there in the audience today, there will be a new opportunity in March next year. We are in the first phase of the research project. We're now in the second year of this 4-year project, but we thought it still would be interesting to share some preliminary insights to discuss this at a roundtable, and also maybe get some input from you in the audience on the topics we are interested in researching in this project. 3 of the project participants will give short presentations based on the research they do for the Geopath project. It will be Dr. Ketevan Bolkovadze from Lund University, Dr. Julie Williamson from the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, and Professor Cornelia Kakaccia from GIP. The topic is, as you know, the Europeanization of Georgia and the Eastern Partnership, perceptions of internal and external actors. We will organize it in the way that each panelist will have some 5 minutes initially to give a statement, present some findings from their research, before we open up the floor for questions and comments from the audience. You will be muted throughout the seminar today. So please use the Q&A function at Zoom to send us your questions, and I will do my best to try to pick up as many questions as possible. And please do not wait until the very last moment. If you send your question early on, then it's a better chance that we will be able to include it in the roundtable discussion. I should also remind you that the whole event is being recorded, and that we will try to wrap up around 1 p.m. Georgian time, 11 o'clock Norwegian time. But without further ado, I'll give the floor to the panelists, and I've taken the liberty as the moderator of the roundtable to reorganize slightly the order of presentations. I think since this is a seminar about Georgia's Europeanization, it makes sense to start in Georgia, and then with Cornelia. Cornelia, you have followed this process very closely from a Georgian perspective. And in the introductory remarks, Professor Dolbaya mentioned that Georgia had made great progress over the last decade. But what would you say are the main challenges and weaknesses when it comes to Georgia's Europeanization drive? Please, Cornelia.
Thank you, Helge. Yes, I agree with what Dr. Dolbaya said about the importance of the Europeanization for Georgia and some other EAP countries, including Ukraine and Moldova. Of course, this is a great achievement for these countries, but at the same time, there's several challenges. And one of the challenges which we could highlight is there's a gap between EU members and societal gap between EU members and EAP countries, including Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, since they don't have a tradition of interactions in societal level. When I'm saying this, we should not mix it up on the relations on the political level, which is sometimes happened. On political level, of course, we have good relations with the EU and the EU member states, but on societal levels, unfortunately, there's a lack of knowledge from both sides, from EU as well as from EAP countries, including Georgia. What are the main drivers, of societal drivers in each member state? And I can give you one of the example. For instance, probably most of you remember when there was a referendum in Netherlands regarding the association agreement of Ukraine. And a lot of people, including some in Georgia, were very surprised that when people actually voted against this. And this was very unique situation for many Georgians, because in Georgian case, Netherlands is number one donor country in Georgia. At the same time, many ordinary Georgians don't understand how this can be. Like at one point, a country actually helps the Europeanization in one country, and then it's kind of like blocking and against the, like association agreement with one of the important EAP states. And one of the reasons for this is that because we don't have actually important knowledge about the societies, and especially in member states like Netherlands, France, and Germany. And the same can be said about our European partners. Of course, they know a little bit about the country's political scene, but we don't have much interaction. Of course, now things are changing for good. For instance, there's a Erasmus Mundus program, some other, like important, like scholarly networks. But when I'm saying that there's a gap, I mean, for instance, Georgia, like pretty much like Ukraine and Moldova, we are rhetorically kind of part of Europe, but in reality, we lack this interaction. For instance, when there's a talk about European security, there's a very slim chance that either Ukrainian or Georgian or Moldovan, I don't know, think tankers or academics attending this kind of events, like for instance, like Munich Security Conference or this kind of event. And of course, these countries actually need to be involved there because, as I said, Europeanization just started, and some people, like some politicians, they will call it like irreversible, like Europeanization. So especially in this time, I think it is important to have to start some sort of to think how to change this dynamic. And it's not so easy. And sometimes when we criticize the governments that there is a need for like societal engagement, they say it's not actually true. We have very good relations with certain member states and with EU level, which is also true. But when we saying we want to do this on a societal level, for instance, exchange among young people, I don't know, among the people who are actually involved in agricultural sector, some other sectors. So, along to the professions, actually, I think this will bring a lot of changes, and people will know a lot more about the EU and the EU member states than we do actually right now. This also brings me another challenge, which is very difficult now to highlight during the 5 minutes, but this also could help the countries in the EAP, especially Georgia, with expectation management. Because as you know, after signing the association agreement, EU doesn't have any more carrots to offer to neither Georgia, neither Moldova or Ukraine. At the same time, there's some sort of expectation from these countries, then there should be some other pathway for these countries to integrate more in EU. And at the same time, as you know, there's some other actors actually involved here who actually tries to influence the Georgian public opinion and basically saying that you don't belong to Europe and nobody expects you in Europe. So you have to be more realistic. And I think in this spectacular situation, I think what we need is EU together with countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. They have to think how to manage this expectation, because especially when EU doesn't come with some sort of clear message about the European perspective of these countries. And I think this is what is one of the biggest challenge right now. And of course, we understand certain realities in EU, including geopolitical, pandemic, on all other issues, including some problems with transatlantic relations, which also impacts very much Georgia and some other EAP countries. And most importantly is also the security situation, because unfortunately these 3 countries, and especially Georgia, has some sort of feeling of the insecurity. And as you know, Georgia is not member of any meaningful international security organization. We are not member of CSTO, CIS, NATO, or any other organization except Guam, and which, as you know, could not really help much. And I think this also creates a lot of how to say, uncertainties about the future of this country and also some EAP countries. Some people call it, like, especially these 3 countries, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, like geopolitical orphans. And then EAP also is considered kind of like gray zone. And unfortunately, these are the challenges which we face right now. And actually, what we need right now is some sort of vision from EU and especially member states, what to do with this region for the next, say, 10, 15, I don't know, 20 years, because this Europeanization process we just started, it will continue. We know that this is very painful. It will take a longer time, but this is, as I said, it's kind of irreversible. So we need the engagement from both sides. And I think the more there will be involvement there on societal level, including think tanks, academia, youth. I think there will be more opportunities to understand each other. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Cornelia. I think what you highlighted about expectation management is extremely important in today's situation. But we'll continue, and then might come back to both that and to the security insecurity that you were discussing in the discussion and the Q&A. And to the audience, please remember the chat is already open, so please send question in the Q&A box at Zoom. But now we'll move on to Katie and maybe widen the perspective somewhat. Katie, you have been focusing on topics such as the rule of law as well as party institutionalization, not only in Georgia but also in Ukraine and Moldova to some extent. And these are, in all three countries, areas where we see some great challenges. And what are the stumbling blocks here? How has Georgia fared in comparison with the two other countries? And are there some lessons that can be learned here from for Georgia from the other two?
Right,
Please.
thank you, Albert. Right, so on my part, I will, in the next 5 minutes, I will try to touch upon what I see is one of the main challenges of the EAP stemming from the governance problems in these countries. When we think about the EAP challenges, the first thing that usually comes to mind is, of course, Russia, right, for a very good reason. But I think that internal governance problems in these countries often pose very serious challenges and even undermines their European achievements. And you know, in the end of the day, that's what EAP is all about, right? It's not about membership, even though we often like to think of it like that, but it is about bringing these countries closer to the European norms of governance, and as a result of that, becoming attractive potential members. And of course, governance is a very broad and multifaceted issue, but I will focus on one, as you mentioned, which I believe is the cornerstone of Europeanization, development, and that is judicial independence. When Georgia signed association agreement and DCFTA, or rather finalized it in 2014, I remember there were many hopes that it would not only allow Georgian businesses to enter the single market, but it would also increase FDI, foreign direct investment, and make Georgia attractive both to the EU as well as the third country investors. But what we have increasingly seen is that, for instance, in Georgia, in the last 2 years, FDI unfortunately has been steadily decreasing, right? Even before the pandemics, in the first half of 2019, there was a 53% drop compared with the same period in 2018. And that is the lowest number since 2009. And the recent cases of Anaklia Deep Sea Port, Georgia Online, or I would say how the government dealt with these cases, once again highlights that in some instances, state can either break the contract or expropriate the assets without any serious implications. And that is, of course, a huge blow to the investment climate. And we have to acknowledge that for Georgia or any EAP country to be able to capitalize on its European achievements, one thing needs to be in place, and that is judicial independence. That is rule of law, right? Only the DCFTA will not make these countries attractive if human rights are not respected, if investors don't feel that their interests will be protected by independent courts. There's a large scientific literature, right? Starting from Barry Weingast, Douglas North, which shows that economic development is very much unlikely without independent judiciary that will act as a neutral judge between the state and investors. And the reason why I'm sort of focusing so much on judiciary is that it also creates a framework which ensures success and sustainability of reforms in other areas. for instance, it would be impossible to think about fighting high-level corruption or problem with procurements without there being independent courts that would adjudicate these cases in an impartial manner. But as you mentioned, things have not been looking very good when it comes to justice in the EAP countries. And again, this is a prevalent problem, not only in Georgia, but also in Ukraine, in Moldova, if we talk about the front-runner countries. And it would be very difficult for them to fully reap the benefits of the CFTA without addressing this issue. Judicial is something that has been on the agenda between the EU and the EAP countries for a long time, right? Starting from large enlargement in 2004, later with the EAP in 2009, and we see that it still continues to be a big issue behind the doors, of course, despite changes in parties and governments. What we also see is that even though there are changes in parties, right, in many of these countries that we've seen throughout the existence of first neighborhood policy and then EAP, each prefers to retain judiciary within its power preservation toolbox. Just a few days ago, EU External Action Service made a very critical statement, for instance, almost uncharacteristically critical statement about the appointment of Supreme Court judges in Georgia. Same happened in Ukraine when in the middle of September, the anti-corruption court was basically gutted by pro-Russian oligarchs in Rada. And I know I'm running out of time, but one thing I would like to add is that, of course, it's a very complex issue, right? Rule of law requires decades to come into existence. But I think one aspect should be for the EU to use stricter conditionality and to tie financial assistance, capacity building assistance to very specific steps when it comes to reforming the justice sector. I'll stop here and hopefully we can continue with parties also later on.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, it would be good to return to this also during the discussion. And one thing is, of course, that the EU maybe should impose stricter conditionality, but also what can be internal drivers here in reform towards more rule of law. But we'll now move out of the region, and I hope Julie will come back into the camera, because now we're moving to the last panelist, Julie Wilhelmsen. And in our project, the Geopath project, Julie, you cover the Russian perspective. And how would you say, based on your research, Russia relates to this process, to Georgia's process of Europeanization?
Thank you. I'd first just like to say that I come to this with some humility and limited knowledge on Georgian-Russian relations, because my main preoccupation is Russian foreign and security politics. So my comments will be based on scrutiny of official Russian statements on Georgia in texts from 2014 to 2020, and I have focused on broadening the picture and on this precise time frame, because I believe that Russia's approach to Georgia has to be understood in a multilateral perspective, and not only how Russia relates to Georgia, but how Russia's view of the broader international game affects Russia's approach to Georgia. And this is, of course, even more important post-2014, where Russia's relations with the West have become extremely strained, and not only with NATO, which we're quite used to, but also with the EU and the West in general. So all these, what some call the in-between countries, potentially become objects of this Russia-West zero-sum game. So my comments will be on that. How has Russia related to Georgia post 2014. And first, I'd just like to share some interesting macro observations, which is that, first of all, if you read how Russia talks about Georgia over time, you find a repetitive and very insistent nature of Russia's statements, which just shows how highly coordinated Russia's information approach is. And I would claim that it becomes even more closed and repetitive as time goes by after 2014. Then secondly, the quite patronizing top-down tone of Russia towards Georgia. Georgia often as a kind of naughty boy to blame for all troubles. You still have this notion of the Georgian people, which Russia really wants to relate to, but definitely the kind of notion of Russia as being the patron of the post-Soviet states area is still very strong. Then secondly, a micro observation, which is interesting, is that Georgia is hardly spoken of. I go through texts, hundreds of them from the Kremlin or the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And a year like 2018, for example, I could hardly find one statement where the word Georgia appears. When Georgia is spoken about, it is increasingly spoken about as what you could call Saakashvili Georgia, or Georgia with Ukraine, Georgia with NATO, Georgia in a general anti-West setting. And then you have a different strain which pertains to the low-level bilateral format of Abashidze Karasin, which is constantly hailed as the only possible positive path towards normalization. But this, of course, in the Russian discourse hinges on whether Georgia is capable of taking positive steps towards this normalization. So how does this develop in Russian official discourse? Georgia, as I said, and the Ivanishvili government too, is increasingly projected as a threatening and dangerous neighbor after 2014. And you can find references where, and this comes a bit later on, 2017, 18, where the conclusion is drawn that actually the Georgian dream, or the new Georgian government, is as bad as the so-called criminal Saakashvili regime. And then one has to remember, and that's very clear from the text, that Saakashvili in the Russian narrative is portrayed as dangerous because he is kind of a Western proxy. And this becomes quite acute after 2014, when Saakashvili appears on the Ukrainian stage. Then you have the Kremlin saying that Kiev and Tbilisi are helping each other to get into the image of being victims of Russian aggression. And then the story is that Ukraine and Georgia together are trying to call in kind of the West, US, NATO, and so forth, to bring Russia down and to destabilize this territory, which Russia seeks to stabilize. And we also see the trend that Georgia is seen as which escalates, I must say, in the years after 2014. It doesn't abate, it escalates. That Georgia is part of a general anti-Russian front in the world, producing anti-Russia propaganda. You see it in comments by Russia on what Georgia does in the Council of Europe, in the International Criminal Court, in the UNHCR, and in the Geneva process. And it's commented on directly as a problem in the Georgian media sphere. And a particularly harsh reaction is elicited with increasing NATO engagement in Georgia. So the prospects of US missile defense systems or NATO infrastructure in Georgia from 2014, NATO training centers 2015, 3 military exercises in 2016 and so forth, as well as even statements on accelerating NATO engagement from Georgian parliamentarians or from the government, are immediately picked up upon and commented by Russia. So this is seen as very, very threatening and dangerous to Russia, and this is clearly where Russia would put into work a forceful approach to Georgia. And the striking thing here, and finally I get to the EU, but the problem with looking at how Russia relates to Georgia's relations with the EU or Europe is that Russia really talks very little about it. And the striking difference between how Russia relates to NATO and the EU is that it relates to the EU still, and also post 2014, and increasingly so, much more positively. Yes, Russia is cautious about the consequences of a Georgian AA agreement, but it does not want to punish Georgia. It even claims that, you know, Georgia has a right to choose. So it's a much more pragmatic approach. And of course, Russia wants to develop trade relations with Georgia, and indeed some of the few comments Russia give on Georgia in its official text, the positive economic development in Georgian-Russian relations is constantly commented upon.
Julia, I was wondering if you could start to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm at the end now.
Very good.
And the EU is in general construed as a more reasonable, sober-minded actor than the US or NATO is. And of course, behind that, you can speculate, but I would think that it is one, the fear of antagonizing Georgia in the way that Ukraine was antagonized. So trying to offer a nicer side, so to speak. And then secondly, clearly, Russia's repeated statements on the EU as being in a crisis, and no belief that the EU is going to try to make Georgia a part of the EU. So there's no point in kind of ruining relations with Georgia by denying Georgia relations with the EU. Probably could become, in the Russian view, complementary to Georgia-Russia trade and relations. Yeah. Thank you. That was my 5 minutes.
Thank you all for very interesting and rich introductions. Time flies, but we still have 20 minutes. I have some questions that I would like to ask you based on your presentations and the general interest in the topic, but I thought was still open with a fundamental question raised by one of our one member of our audience, Tonike Metreveli, who asks, is the Europeanization of Georgia an irreversible process? You mentioned that, Cornelia, that it's been spoken of as such, but I would actually encourage all three of our panelists to reflect on the irreversibility of the Europeanization drive in Georgia. But maybe Cornelia, you can go first.
Yes, I think my answer will be yes and no, because as I said, this is the rhetoric which is used by politicians, and I understand that. But at the same time, if you look at the realities, we have very high approval with European integration in Georgian society. So unlike in Moldova, where you have a split in the society, and this is actually what Russia wants to see in Georgia, because they could not bring the same kind of, discussion in Georgia after 2008 war, when Russia actually lost the direct influence on Georgian politics, but they still want to bring this influence to bringing this idea that which project is better for Georgia, to join, for instance, Eurasian Union, European Union, or some other things like this. This is quite normal, for instance, in Moldova, but in Georgia, I think so far they trying, but this is not a mainstream, even though I would not say they are not so successful, because we already have right-wing movements and political parties actually who are voicing that sort of, sentiments which actually Russia likes, and they hear it kind of like music in their ears. And of course, if we look to how the things will evolve in the future, lots of things regarding the Europeanization will depend how the Georgian society actually could react, and how much resistant and they could show towards Russian propaganda and basically Russian influence. And when I say influence, it's not only political influence, it's economical influence, as Julie already mentioned. Russia is now trying to economically tie Georgia, and it became #2 trade partner for Georgia. In one way, it's a good thing for Georgia, because Georgia needs a trade and Russia is a huge market, but at the same time, it's a huge problem, because as you know, Georgian Russian relations are quite problematic, and anytime they can bring any new embargo, like they did several times with Moldova. So this is a huge problem. And as far as the positive side of why I'm more positive about the Europeanization of Georgia, that what I see that especially young people and intellectuals, civil society, other parts of Georgian society, I think they already they are actually the agents of the change in this country. And I think if you look to in general, I think I'm very hopeful that this will be reversible. Of course, there will be some challenges. There will be some attempts to change this, but I think if you look, realistically, Georgia doesn't have any other choice, because Georgians, starting from 1991, they already, they don't want to be involved in any other post-Soviet structure dominated by Russia, whether it will be CIS, Eurasian Union, or other. And there's no alternative to, if you look around. Georgia cannot become a member of the Middle East, even though it's very close to the region, right? So, and if you look to around, there's only one project, which is European project, where Georgia can fit in.
Thank you, Cornelia. Julia, you wanted to chip in here.
Yes, I wanted to chip in because I'm very interested in what we mean with the word Europeanization. And I think Keti's presentation or point was very, very important because becoming European or democratic or whatever you want to call it is a matter of norms to me. And my big fear, not only when I look at Georgia, but also some of the European and Western democratic countries, is that the very polarized societies we live in, we're actually managing to damage the good institutions and norms we have had. So therefore, I would say that whether Georgia manages to Europeanize is a totally open question, and it's very much up to whether Georgians manage to mend a polarized society and start focusing on strengthening institutions and the rule of law.
I wonder, before I let you in, Keti, if we should also add one more question, because I think it's related from one of our participants in the audience. How at all do you think problems related to rule of law and democracy in some EU countries, such as Hungary, affect the view of EU as a role model in Georgia? So if you can also maybe include that in your response here.
Right, a fantastic question. I don't think that it's necessarily, it will reverse, but my worry is that this process might get stuck if, again, there will not be progress on rule of law and more importantly also on party institutionalization, right? Because I do believe that's another very big problem that's facing front-runner countries in the Eastern Partnership, right? We have this sort of unbounded uncertainty, right? In Western democracies, we have bounded uncertainty, which means that there's uncertainty about who is going to win the elections. In countries like, in hybrid regimes like Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, we have uncertainty about what is going to happen to the party if they lose the elections, right? And we see that they are often targeted, targets of intimidation. Some of the parties just simply disappear. And I think that it's this fear of being out of office, which often makes the dominant party sort of clinch to power and politicize public resources. And on the other hand, competing parties like we had in Moldova to actually use state for private enrichment and engage in kleptocracy, unfortunately, right? So I think that it will be irreversible if there are fundamental changes on this environment where politics is done, basically. And I think that party systems are such a crucial part of it. Yeah, and when it comes to Hungary and Poland, of course, it's not a good example, and unfortunately, Russia is very much using that in its rhetoric, saying that well, they are not democratic. Why either Russia or maybe also it's part of the propaganda in these countries. But I think that there is, at least in Georgia, as Cornelia mentioned, there is a very clear will to, and we don't really have much options. So I don't think that will necessarily influence our choices so much. So I'm more hopeful.
Yep. In Georgia, you are soon to make some choices in the upcoming parliamentary elections. And I would just like to advertise for the audience that we're also going to have a seminar this Thursday devoted to the parliamentary elections in Georgia. But Cornelia, I was wondering to what extent, for the maybe non-Georgian specialists in our audience, could you say something about, are there differences between the two major blocks when it comes to the speed and scope of Europeanization, and also with the new legislation around the elections, with the threshold being very low? Will these elections have an impact on the Europeanization drive in Georgia?
Yes, I think this election could be very important because, as you all know, Georgia actually is promoting itself as a European state, and as Katie already mentioned, and I would like to second that for this there's several important tests which it should actually pass, and one of them will be rule of law, which is still critical and still problematic, and then election, because unfortunately, even though country is already almost like 29 years old, we have an independence, but I think we don't have mature democracy. We still kind of aspiring democracy and not consolidated democracy. So, but at the same time, also stability of the country is not assured because the political system is very fragile. Political parties are very weak, especially there's a lot of problems inside the parties, which I don't want to disclose, but one of them is actually party internal democracy, which is a huge, huge problem for the country. And of course, election, because now this election is very interesting in that sense, because we used to have a so-called Georgian legend. That's what I'm calling it, that according to the Georgian legend, we should not, the Georgian people doesn't give the mandate to the ruling parties more than two times actually. And now it seems like, we don't know yet results, but we will see what Georgian people will decide. Will they vote again for the same ruling party, or they will stick with the same principles, and they will we will have maybe coalition government, which could be actually the best scenario for Georgia. And this could give more, how to say, more diversity in the parliament, because if we will get smaller parties in the parliament and coalition government, which actually Georgia doesn't have that culture yet, but probably we need to move to that direction. And of course, one of the important things, how the international society will assess this election, of course, and most importantly, how the Georgian people will assess it, because it's about legitimacy internally and externally. And if Georgian society will feel that there was some sort of, how to say, unfair election, and then this could lead, unfortunately, to some, how to say, maybe some attempts to challenge the government, which could be very bad for Georgia in terms of Georgian stability. So I'll stop here because I don't want to take much on this topic right now.
No, and we'll come back to this, I assume, on Thursday at GIP NUPI seminar on the elections. In her presentation, Julia said that Russia was based on the official documents she's reading, or statements she's reading from the Kremlin, mostly disinterested in Georgia. And we were talking about this ahead of the seminar today, that there are some interesting parallels here between how Russia relates to Georgia and how Russia relates to Norway. Could you expand a little on that?
Yes, because I've been doing a similar exercise, just looking into how Russia talks about Norway, which of course usually is construed as a kind of a successful partnership between Russia and Norway in the north. And there are some parallels. First of all, both Georgia and Norway are small countries, and Russia doesn't really give us a lot of attention. But then you see this increasing attention, which comes together with the increasingly strained relations with the West in general. And that's a similar trend. So both for Georgia and for Norway, you have this very strong talk and I mean, bordering on threats of what will happen if Georgia and Norway starts to continues to let particularly NATO military infrastructure, NATO military exercises, and so on closer to Russia's borders. So that's a very clear picture of how geopolitics really is the main factor. And that sometimes for Norway, and I think for Georgia too, it doesn't really matter what we are doing because Russia is playing this game basically with the US. And then we're kind of prisoners of that in a sense. Mm-hmm. And then, but the difference would be, if you look at the little I know of the Georgian debate compared to the Norwegian, is that in Norway, of course, we have this tradition from the Cold War of deterring Russia through our NATO membership, but at the same time reassuring Russia that Norway would not become a territory from where you could launch an offensive strike against Russia, so to say. So that's maybe one thing which, and that seems to have an effect. To signal to Russia that, you know, we want to be able to defend ourselves, but we're not going to be a launch pad for US military force against Russia. But here the debates are more different, I think, on the Georgian and Norwegian sides, but quite similar in how Russia talks about Georgia and Norway as smaller countries, but the difference also being, of course, that Norway is off limits for Russia to a different extent, because Russia has this identity of being the patron of the post-Soviet state, and also increasingly the protector, of course, of threatened people, as they construe it, in, for example, in the secessionist territories of Georgia. So that's a big difference, of course.
So this difference also speaks to the insecurity, I guess, that Cornelia was mentioning. We are running out of time, but I would like to include one more of the questions that we got from the audience, which also speaks to this heart of the core of our project, Georgia between EU and Russia. And that was a question about state-church relations in Georgia. What role I assume that the church plays as a conservative actor when it comes to the Europeanization of Georgian society, and also the person who asked the question also hinted on the relations between the Georgian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. So state-church relations in Georgia and Europeanization. Who wants to give a very short answer on that before we, or a comment on that before we wrap up? Anyone?
I'll try.
Cornelia. Great,
even though it's, I don't know how I can manage in so shortly, but what I would like to say that, as you know, Salome Minisashvili, actually, she's writing in a lot about this topic, and so I would encourage our audience to read her recent papers on this topic. As far as the Georgian church relations and role of actually Georgian church in Europeanization is very interesting because church, as you know, enjoys high approval from society, and it's kind of I would say I'm more inclined towards engaging church in Europeanization than opposing church. And of course, there's, we know the Georgian church has a lot of influences, including from Russia, and it's very conservative organization. But at the same time, if we look to the examples of Romania or Polish church or some others, all churches, I think we have to understand they are very conservative. And of course, it's not so easy to engage a Georgian church, especially in Europeanization, but that's what must be done. And when we talk about the church, we have to understand that they have their own kind of constraints, and but we should not be also idealistic that, for instance, tomorrow we will see that Georgian church is, how to say, becomes very pro-European. That's not going to happen. But if they become neutral, at least in the Europeanization process, I think that will help a lot. And we have very good examples, as I said, in Romania and some other countries. And I think we need to study that, you know, like cases. And of course, church is also playing very important role in foreign policy, and we can see that sometimes, I don't know, even during Russian-Georgian conflict, probably you saw that Georgian church enjoys very close contact with Russian Orthodox Church, even though the, you know, officially Russian state doesn't recognize, you know, Georgia's sovereignty over South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Russian Orthodox Church actually didn't follow the suit. Of course, there's some reason which I don't want to now, you know, explain, but I think we have to understand that there will be always some connection between Russian Orthodox Church and Georgian Orthodox Church. And don't forget that Georgian Orthodox Church actually was part of that, you know, so, and this influence will be there for some time. But what is needed, what I think is that there after, I mean, we need a little bit more, how to say, pro-European kind of new, you know, people in the church who would strengthen and who will understand some basics of democracy and how the European Union actually functions. And if we could actually work a little bit towards that, that will be very good. Of course, again, I'm saying that we should not be very idealistic. Nobody can change the church. I mean, church can influence us, and they can actually even marginalize. So it's even including civil society or some other actors. But it will not be easy like some civil society actors in Georgia think that they can marginalize church. I don't think that this is serious, and this will not work.
So you'll find a link to the publication in the chat that was provided from GIP. What's left for me now is to apologize to those in the audience who sent questions that we didn't have time for during this session, to thank TSU and GIP for co-organizing this event. And then I look forward to continued cooperation and new both roundtables and seminars within the framework of the Geopath project. And as I mentioned already, the next event in our joint project will be a seminar with Cornelia on the elections on Thursday this week. So stay tuned and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much, everyone.